They said no one should walk through the old Umbala forest after the sun sets. The elders warned that even the wind refused to pass through its twisted trees after dark. But Obi, a quiet carpenter from the edge of the village, liked shortcuts. That evening, burdened with worry and silence, he chose the forbidden path. The trail was overgrown, silent but not still. Then he saw her. A woman stood ahead, barefoot, with a white cloth wrapped neatly around her body, her back turned to him. Her hair fell in long black waves, untouched by the wind. Obi slowed his steps. "Are you lost?" he asked, uncertain. She turned slowly. Her eyes met his with a calm that made the hairs on his arms rise. She smiled. "No, I've been waiting." The air shifted. The birds stopped singing. For reasons he couldn't explain, Obi didn't run. He didn't ask how she knew his name or what she was doing so deep in the forest. He only saw her face and felt strangely at peace. She told him her name was Tina, and her voice sounded like it came from a dream he couldn't fully remember. He offered to walk her home, but she said she had no home. That night, he couldn't sleep. The way her eyes held him, like she had known him long before he was born, haunted his thoughts. Something about her was both wrong and beautiful, and somehow, he knew he'd go back to find her. The next evening, Obi left his tools behind and returned to the forest, not with fear, but with longing. He told himself it was curiosity, yet his heart raced with something warmer, stranger. The village buzzed with market talk and grinding pestles, but Obi's ears were deaf to it all. The forest greeted him with silence once again. And there she was, Tina, sitting on a fallen tree trunk, like a statue placed by the gods. This time she spoke first. She asked about his life, his dreams, the weight he carried. Her voice softened, the edges of his mind. Obi spoke more than he usually did. He told her about the death of his parents, his loneliness, the way his hands built things for others but never held anything of his own. She listened, eyes fixed on him like nothing else existed. When he asked again where she came from, she looked away and whispered, "Somewhere far from here." As the stars blinked awake, she placed her hand on his. It was cold, unnaturally so, but it didn't frighten him. In fact, it grounded him. That night, he felt less alone. Tina said she could only stay in the forest, that stepping beyond it would break something. He didn't understand, but he didn't question. Love, he thought, didn't always need logic. It just needed presence. As he walked back, the village lights looked dim compared to the glow she left in his mind. He was falling for her, like a man walking into fog. Within days, everyone noticed the change. Obi began carving softer shapes, humming while he worked, smiling at the wind. But questions followed the joy. The villagers noticed how he vanished every evening and returned with his eyes full of clouds. Mama Iboob said she saw him talking to the air by the forest's edge. Children claimed to hear laughter from the trees. A group of young men followed him one night but lost sight of him before reaching the forest. Word reached Elder Madhu, who summoned Obi to the shrine and poured libation over kola nuts. "What spirit follows you, boy?" the old man asked. Obi said nothing. How could he explain that Tina wasn't a spirit, but someone who made him feel more alive than any living woman had? Back in the forest, Tina warned him, "They'll try to take you away from me." Her voice trembled like she was afraid, not for herself, but for him. Obi promised her he wouldn't leave. He told her he was ready to build a life with her, even if it meant building it among the trees. Tina's eyes welled with something that shimmered, not quite tears. That night, under the moonlight, she let him kiss her. It was brief, cold, and dreamlike, but real enough for Obi. And as he held her, the trees around them swayed without wind. The forest, once known for fear, had become his sanctuary. But just beyond the trees, suspicion brewed. And something ancient stirred. The decision came as quietly as a falling leaf. Obi asked Tina to marry him. Not with a ring, but with carved wood he shaped into a perfect circle. She accepted with a nod, though her eyes held sadness. "I can't leave this place," she whispered. Obi didn't care. He would bring the world to her, even if it meant losing his own. They held their ceremony at the edge of the stream within the forest. No witnesses, no drummers, no chants, just the moonlight and the trees. Tina wore the same white wrapper. Obi wore his best brown tunic. He promised her forever. She said, "Forever has already begun." The leaves rustled like applause. When he kissed her, a wind swept through the trees for the first time in weeks. Back in the village, the people spoke in riddles and warnings. A man who marries a shadow becomes one. A woman whose feet do not press the earth walks with the dead. Obi didn't hear them. He moved into a small hut he built in the forest clearing. Every morning he awoke to Tina's cold embrace, her pale smile, her quiet humming. It was not a normal life. It was something between worlds. But Obi didn't care. He had love, or what he believed was love. Yet some nights, when Tina stared into the dark for too long, Obi would ask softly, "Are you truly mine?" And always, her answer came with a stillness too deep to trust. For now. The first sign came on a quiet evening. Obi tried to light a fire beside their hut, rubbing dry wood the way he had done 100 times. But the flames flickered, and the second time, the fire hissed like it had been spat on. He looked at Tina, who was sitting on a rock, watching the smoke twist around her ankles. "Maybe the wood is damp," she said softly, but her voice lacked surprise. Obi ignored it. The next day, he fetched firewood from deeper in the forest. Still, nothing lit. That night, he dreamt of ashes falling like rain and Tina standing in the center, untouched. When he awoke, the hut was colder than before. Tina's skin felt like stone pressed beneath the river. He asked her gently, "Are you ill?" She smiled and said, "I'm not meant for warmth." Obi tried not to dwell on the words, but his body, once full of life around her, began to ache with an invisible chill. He wrapped himself tighter at night, even when she lay beside him. The cold was no longer just physical. It was crawling into his thoughts. And still, he loved her. Every part of him wanted her to be real, even if everything around her refused to behave like life should. The trees near their hut stopped shedding. The birds avoided their roof. But he convinced himself it was love. And love, he thought, could endure even the strange. Obi's visits to the village became rare. The few times he walked back to buy oil or grain, the stares felt sharper. Children no longer greeted him. Adults stopped mid-sentence when he passed. One afternoon, an old friend named Emeka pulled him aside behind the market stalls. "Obi," he whispered, "you walk like a man loved by death. What have you done?" Obi forced a smile. "I'm married now, that's all." Emeka frowned. "To who? No one sees her. No one knows her name. And when you pass, dogs howl." Obi walked away before hearing more. Back in the forest, Tina met him at the edge. "You shouldn't go back there," she said, brushing dust from his shoulder. Her fingers, though careful, left a layer of frost on his tunic. That night, Tina sang. It was a low, rhythmic tune, older than any Obi had heard. The melody dug into his bones, reminding him of funerals he'd long forgotten. He asked her where she learned it. She stared into the darkness and said, "It comes with me." The trees around their hut began to lean strangely, their branches curving away. A squirrel tried to climb one and fell, dead before it touched the ground. Obi said nothing. Love, he thought again. Love was patience. Love was commitment. But the silence around Tina was no longer comforting. It felt like a warning, stretched into eternity. And slowly, it was unraveling the thread of his soul. Mama Neka, the village midwife, came to Obi's hut once when he was a boy, laying hands on his fevered chest and whispering prayers. She had always been trusted, feared, and rarely wrong. Now she came again, but not to the forest. She came to his dreams. 3 nights in a row, Obi saw her face, old and weathered, hovering over his sleep. On the 3rd night she spoke. You lay with the dead, and the dead remember everything. Obi woke drenched in sweat, Tina beside him like frost carved into flesh. He tried to shake the dream, but the midwife appeared again. In the village, in person. She waited at the edge of the market, holding a calabash covered in black cloth. "Come," she said. Obi hesitated. Tina was waiting at home, but something about the woman's gaze pulled him. She led him to her hut and poured libation into the earth. "Tell me, what color is her shadow?" she asked. Obi blinked. "What do you mean?" Mama Neka slammed her palm on the floor. "You love a ghost. You married a lie, and lies come with a price." Obi felt dizzy. He left the hut with his heart pounding like war drums. That evening, he returned to the forest and stood outside their home. Tina emerged from the shadows, her smile softer than ever. But for the first time, Obi noticed. She cast no shadow at all. The sun hit her, and still, the ground beneath her feet stayed empty. Obi couldn't sleep. The shadowless truth gnawed at him. At dawn, he slipped out while Tina still hummed inside the hut. He walked to the oldest part of the village, to the abandoned cemetery that sat behind the shrine wall. The grass was overgrown, and the stones cracked with age. Obi wandered for hours, searching for something he couldn't name. Then he found it, a small faded headstone half buried in moss. It read, "Tina Izini, died 20 years ago. Never found, never mourned." Obi fell to his knees. His blood turned to ice. The date was clear. The name, too. He remembered hearing the story as a child, a girl who vanished into the forest after a betrayal. Her body never recovered. Her spirit said to linger where love had failed her. He backed away, breath short and uneven. The birds were silent again. He ran. The forest seemed darker now. The trees bent differently, as though bowing to something ancient. At the hut, Tina stood in the doorway, her head tilted. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. Obi couldn't speak. Her smile didn't fade. "Now that you know," she said, stepping toward him, "do you still love me?" Her voice trembled like a wind that had waited too long to howl. Obi looked into her eyes, so human, yet hollow, and realized the question wasn't about love. It was about surrender. And love, real love, wasn't supposed to cost your soul. Rain came heavy that evening, soaking the earth, turning footpaths into rivers. Obi stood just outside the hut, the storm pounding his shoulders. Tina stepped out, behind him barefoot, calm, but something was wrong. The rain didn't touch her. It fell all around her, but not on her. Her wrapper remained dry, her hair unmoved by the wind. Obi watched in quiet horror. "Tina," he whispered, but the word was fragile in his throat. She turned to him, her face as serene as ever. "Don't be afraid," she said. "You knew from the beginning." Obi wanted to run, but his feet belonged to the ground now. They were rooted, like the forest had claimed him. Inside the hut, the fire crackled for the first time in days. Tina sat before it, and the flames shrank low, flickering like breath. Held too long. Obi sat across from her, soaking wet, and asked, "What do you want from me?" She looked up. To be remembered, to be loved without fear. Her words sounded beautiful, but beneath them lived something cold and ancient. That night, Obi dreamed again. In the dream, he was under the river, breathing in water. Tina hovered above him, her white cloth floating like a shroud. He awoke gasping, his hands gripping the earth as if clawing his way out of a grave. Morning came, but the forest never changed. It held him now. It held both of them, like an altar waiting for sacrifice. News of Obi's haunting presence reached the wandering drummer, Uzo, who claimed to see spirits through his blind eye. He came to the village one evening, holding his skin-tight talking drum and a satchel of charms. The elders invited him, desperate to make sense of the quiet dread sweeping the village. "He married a woman of air," Uzo said, "and forgot that wind does not weep." That night, Uzo played his drum at the forest's edge, not for celebration, but for summoning. Obi heard the sound from within the hut, and Tina rose slowly. "He's calling," she murmured, "but not for me." She stepped outside, and, for the first time, the trees pulled back, making way. Uzo's drumming stopped. "Show yourself," he said aloud. Tina appeared at the edge of the clearing. Her feet didn't rustle the leaves. Her eyes met Uzo's blind one. "Why summon the dead?" she asked. Uzo placed a small gourd on the ground and chanted. Tina smiled, not kindly. "You cannot bind me. I'm not a wandering ghost. I was chosen." The gourd shattered. Uzo stumbled back, bleeding from the mouth. He looked at Obi, who now stood behind Tina, silent as stone. "Boy," Uzo gasped. "You still have time to run." But Obi didn't move. Something deeper than fear had buried itself in his chest. Tina turned to him, her voice gentle again. "I told you they'd come for me." The forest went still. The drummer wept, knowing he had failed. Obi sat by the river alone. Tina had vanished for 2 nights without a trace, and the silence she left behind had grown loud inside him. He stared at the water, its surface dark and endless until he saw it. Movement beneath the current. He knelt closer. Faces. Not clear ones, but suggestions of sorrow. Women. A child. A figure that looked like Tina. The river whispered, not in words but in memories. He blinked, and the vision was gone. Moments later, he heard footsteps. He turned and saw old Dyke, the forgotten river keeper, approaching with a calabash on his head. "You've seen her story now," Dyke said without introduction. Obi said nothing. "She was betrayed, boy. Left to die by the man she loved. Buried by shame. No one mourned her, so the river held her pain." Obi clenched his fists. "Then why me?" Dyke looked into the water. "Because you loved her, blindly. Because your heart opened when others ran. That opened the gate." Obi stood, trembling. "Is she evil?" Dyke sighed. "No, just unfinished." The river gurgled softly, almost in agreement. "You can still let her go," Dyke added, "but not without cost." Obi closed his eyes. Letting go felt like tearing out a piece of himself. But keeping her meant never feeling the sun again. The river waited, watching, as if it too needed his answer. The price of love, he realized, wasn't always a happy ending. It was the courage to know when the ending must come. That night, Obi returned to the forest one last time. He carried no tools, no food, only the small wooden ring he had carved for Tina on their wedding day. The hut stood where it always had, but it felt more hollow now, like a story about to end. Tina stood inside, waiting, her eyes softer than he remembered. "I went to the river," Obi said. She nodded. "Then you know." He stepped closer, pressing the wooden ring into her palm. "You deserved mourning. You deserved memory. I can't give you forever, but I can give you peace." Her hands trembled. For the first time, Tina wept. Not water, but smoke. Wisps of memory curled from her eyes and drifted into the air. Obi opened his arms. She stepped in. Their embrace was brief. The moment she touched his chest, warmth returned. Then, she was gone. No scream. No shatter. Only the rustling of trees, as if exhaling a breath held too long. The hut collapsed into dust. The ground brightened. Birds returned. Obi fell to his knees, tears falling into the earth. The wind carried her name once, Tina, before it disappeared entirely. The forest was quiet again, but not dead. Just alive, in a new way. Obi walked out alone, the first time in months. The villagers watched him pass, and this time, no one looked away. Mama Neka whispered, "He brought her peace." But Obi said nothing. He just kept walking, lighter now, for though he had loved a ghost, he had become the man who buried sorrow with love. Weeks passed, but the memory of Tina did not fade. Obi tried to return to his old life, He reopened his workshop near the village square. His hands, once known for their craftsmanship, now trembled slightly. Villagers visited him with quiet respect, no longer whispering about ghosts behind his back. Yet at night, when the wind brushed through the palm fronds, he sometimes thought he heard her humming. It wasn't fear that followed him now. It was longing. Every tool he touched reminded him of her cold fingers. Every fire he lit reminded him of her chill. Sometimes he found himself talking aloud, forgetting she was gone. One evening, as he carved a child's stool, he saw her figure in the doorway. He blinked. Nothing. Just the light playing tricks. But the scent of river water lingered in the air. Mama Neka visited him days later with kola nuts and boiled yam. She didn't speak of Tina at first. Then, as she stood to leave, she turned and said, "Spirits don't vanish, Obi. They settle, and when they've been loved, they rest better." Obi nodded slowly, unsure if the ache in his chest was love or loss. He walked to the river that night and dropped the wooden ring into the water. It floated briefly, then sank without a ripple. Behind him, the trees did not move. The night held no voice. For the first time, it was only Obi. But a part of him still hoped the wind would whisper her name again. The forest had changed. Where once the trees leaned like mourners, now they stood tall and straight. New vines climbed upward. Birds returned, in flocks, building nests in the canopy. Children dared each other to touch its edge, though no one ventured deep. Obi did. Not with fear, but with respect. He walked past the spot where the hut once stood. Nothing remained now but soft earth and sprouting grass. He knelt and placed a carved wooden butterfly there. "Fly far, Tina," he whispered. As he turned to leave, he noticed a patch of white lilies blooming nearby, though no such flower had ever grown in that forest before. Perhaps it was coincidence, perhaps something else. Back in the village, the elders declared the forest cleansed. They invited drummers and held a feast, calling it the Day of Peace. Obi sat at the edge of the gathering, accepting a calabash of palm wine but barely sipping. Children ran past, their laughter rising into the night air. For them, this was celebration. For him, it was farewell. He didn't resent them. After all, they'd never known her. They had never seen her eyes, heard her laughter, or felt the weight of her sorrow. But Obi had, and now he carried it like a memory carved in oak, one that would weather storms, but never fade. He would not speak of Tina again. Some loves, he now understood, were not meant for stories, but for silence that stretches gently through time. One day, a young woman arrived in the village. She claimed to be a traveler from Umudim, seeking stories for her work as a historian. Her name was Ifunanya, and she had heard rumors of a ghost bride, of a man who loved beyond life. The elders refused her. "We do not speak of such things," they said. But someone told her to see Obi. He was mending a door frame when she arrived. She asked gently, "Is it true?" He looked at her, dust on his brow, and said, "What do you believe?" Ifunanya sat nearby, opened her book, and began to write. "I believe grief changes shape. I believe love is the thread between two worlds." Obi studied her face, bright, curious, untouched by fear. He wanted to tell her everything, but something held him back. "She was real," he finally said, "but not for everyone." Ifunanya nodded. She stayed for days, asking, more, never pushing. On the 5th morning, Obi handed her the last carving Tina ever touched, a smooth, pale statue of a woman kneeling with arms open. "Tell them," he said, "that she was more than a ghost." Ifunanya bowed her head. "I will." She left, with her book full of truths and her eyes full of questions. Obi watched her go, wondering if one day someone else would come looking. If so, he'd be ready, with stories and silence. Both were sacred now. Both belonged to Tina. Years passed. Obi's beard grew gray, his hands slower but no less steady. Children gathered near his workshop, listening to his tales of wood and wisdom. He never said Tina's name aloud, but she lived in the pauses between his sentences. One Harmattan morning, a boy brought him a smooth stone from the forest. It had a mark carved by nature that resembled the letter T. The boy asked, "What does it mean?" Obi looked at the stone, smiled faintly, and replied, "It means someone was once remembered here." That night, the wind came soft through the village. It curled through Obi's window and whispered, not with sorrow but with joy. It carried two names, Obi and Tina. Somewhere, deep in the forest where no path remained, lilies bloomed beneath moonlight. The river flowed quietly, its surface smooth, its secrets sleeping, and in that silence, love remained, not haunting, not heavy, but light as ash, warm as a hand once held, and endless as memory. Obi sat by his window, watching stars blink across the sky. He did not fear the dark anymore, for he had loved a ghost, and she had taught him how to be human. And that, he now understood, was the most haunting truth of all. Not that she had died, but that she had made him feel alive. The wind whispered again. Obi closed his eyes and smiled. The forest had been quiet for years, but on the anniversary of the Day of Peace, drums echoed through Mbala once more. This time, it wasn't for fear, it was for remembrance. Elder Madhu, once stern and skeptical, led a group of children into the forest's edge and showed them where the lilies bloomed. Once, he told them, a man built a home here for a woman no one else could see. The children asked if she was a spirit, a witch, or a fairy. She was Tina, he replied, and she was loved. In the center of the clearing, villagers raised a wooden statue, tall, graceful, carved from the same timber Obi had once worked with his bare hands. It bore no face, only arms stretched open. Below it, a plaque read, "To the one who returned, our forest to us." That evening, as the drummers played and the women danced with white cloths tied around their waists, the villagers swore they saw a shadow pass through the trees. Calm, unthreatening, like someone finally walking home. In that moment, no one feared her. They welcomed her. Even the elders, once stubborn and afraid, bowed their heads. In honoring her, they honored Obi too, for he had loved across the veil and returned not broken, but wiser. The drums beat louder, the fire blazed, and somewhere, Tina's name danced in the flames like smoke turned to song. Years later, when Obi's time came, he passed quietly in his sleep. Eyes closed, hands curled around his last carving. It was unfinished, a small cradle he had been crafting for a neighbor's newborn. The village mourned him not with wails but with music. They placed the cradle by his feet and the wooden statue of Tina beside his grave. Mama Neka, now frail but fierce in voice, spoke at the ceremony. He loved what we feared, and in doing so, he changed what this place means. That evening, the villagers lit lanterns and floated them down the river. Each carried a word: peace, love, truth, remembrance. The lanterns glowed like spirits finding their path. One boy asked why Obi had never left the village, why he hadn't run away after loving a ghost. The answer came softly from an old woman who had once refused to speak Tina's name. Because love, real love, doesn't run from the unknown. It walks toward it. In the years that followed, children were told the tale not as a warning, but as a lesson. The carving Obi left behind became a symbol of seeing people beyond what they appear to be. His tools were kept in the village shrine. His hut, now overgrown, remained untouched, a sacred site. No longer did anyone avoid the forest. Instead, they walked through it with care, remembering that sometimes the ones we cannot see are the ones we need most to understand. Obi had carved more than wood. He carved history. Ifunanya returned to the village a decade later. She had published books, lectured across cities, and collected hundreds of stories, but none haunted her like the tale of Obi and Tina. She sat beside the river once more, her notebook aged and worn. The statue still stood in the forest, weathered but unbroken. Villagers had begun bringing offerings to it, carvings, fresh flowers, and white cloth. Some said the statue wept dew at dawn. Some said it sang when the wind moved right. Ifunanya smiled at the stories, but she knew that the truth was deeper than magic. It was about a man who chose to see love where others saw fear. That afternoon, she met a group of schoolchildren under the baobab tree. "Tell us the ghost story," they begged. She opened her notebook and said, "It's not a ghost story. It's a love story. About someone who stayed, someone who listened, and someone who forgave." The children listened, wide-eyed and silent, as she recited Obi's tale, not with horror, but with reverence. As dusk fell, they followed her to the statue, laying small trinkets at its feet. Ifunanya placed her old notebook down beside the offerings. "Your story is safe," she whispered. "It will not be forgotten." And in that soft air, as the stars blinked above, the forest no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like a beginning that waited only for those willing to believe in what cannot always be seen. The village of Umbala grew. Roads reached its edges. Markets bustled with noise. Strangers arrived and left, but one thing never changed: the forest. No matter how modern the world became, the forest remained sacred. Every year they held the festival of the white cloth. No one spoke Tina's full story aloud anymore. It had become something known in the heart like breath. Children grew up knowing the path to the clearing. Couples walked there before marriage. Elders sat beneath the statue and told quiet truths. Some claimed they still saw Obi sitting at the forest's edge, carving under the sun. Whether it was spirit or memory, no one questioned it, because now it was part of them. A tale woven into their identity. People who once feared the unknown now embraced it. They had learned through Obi that the unseen was not always evil. Sometimes it was simply waiting to be loved. On the 100th anniversary of Tina's death, the village gathered under moonlight. A girl sang a new song, soft, trembling, beautiful. And just as the final note drifted into the wind, an elder stood and whispered the last words ever written in Ifunanya's notebook. And so, the story of the man who married a ghost became the story of a village that learned to love the unseen. And that, they say, is the most powerful story of all. We hope you enjoyed today's story. Give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. That's all for today. Take care, folks.